From my story to your story, let's talk about grief. I will share my own grief journey, along with interviewing others about their path of sorrow and healing. I hope that you, the listener, will hear something that helps as you navigate your own grief, and that God will be glorified along the way. This content is meant as a discussion and not to give professional help. Let's get started.
So today I have my oldest son, James, here with me, who I call Jamie. And I'm going to interview him today and get his perspective on his dad passing away, because he has a different perspective than anyone else. And so we're hoping that some of the things we cover today will help someone out there that is grieving the loss of maybe their dad or something similar. Let's compare coffees, because they were making fun of me. I don't know if you can see this, but mine is much lighter. He's made fun of me because I drink mostly creamer is the problem. All right, so we're going to start out with something more positive. How would you describe your dad?
Unconditionally loving, faithful, loyal, big personality without being a big demonstrative demeanor.
That's good.
He wasn't the loudest person in the room ever, but maybe the biggest personality in terms of affect and feeling toward people.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. So what are some good characteristic traits that he had?
A lot. I just isolate one, maybe, that he would fully embrace the life of whoever it was that he was loving in that moment. He didn't do things within his own context or desire or his own interests, but like if he loved you and you were interested in fill in the blank, then that's what he was going to be into.
Exactly.
He'd text me about Kentucky games, and I knew he probably really didn't care outside of the fact that I cared. So we would text back and forth. I would just vent to him about it. If Justin was into getting a car or working on a project, that's what he was into. If the grandkids were into an item, a toy, a thing.
And John was when he was into cooking.
Yeah.
We took him to make sure he went to the Paula Deen restaurant when he played soccer. We went to the Man U game, or whatever.
Selfless, but in a sense of like, there's people that are selfless and serve, but in the sense of like a genuine interest. His genuine interests would change based on who he was loving in the moment, I guess you'd say.
It's a great one.
You didn't feel like he was insincere about whatever it is that he was doing.
Okay. All right. So in your interview, I feel like you have had a lot to deal with and unpack. So we're going to get right into the hard stuff. I think one of the things that I would like to hear from your viewpoint is that you had different aspects of dealing with that moment. And however much you want to describe, whatever you're comfortable describing of that. But, after the moment of your dad's death, because you were there at the exact moment, looking him right in the face, you not only deal with grief, but you basically had to deal with it as a trauma, and then a dread of other things to come.
Yeah.
So tell me some about that.
Well, I know that you've already delved into that some, the physical circumstances around it, events, and Justin as well. I would put his in. So if you've listened and you're familiar with the circumstance, unexpected, in a way, unexpected heart issue, catastrophic heart issue in a moment, in an instant, I guess you'd say. So I guess in the month leading up to his passing, I guess I should clarify, I worked under him. I work at the church where he pastored. which has its own interesting dynamic. But some things had changed in that last month, I guess. It felt like a little bit before. Yeah, so I guess to give some background, I worked at the church where he's the pastor, so he's also my boss, employer at that point. Served and worked alongside and with him in a number of ways over the course of, I guess, about that point, about 10 years. 10 years that we'd been there in a variety of roles. Interestingly enough, we'd been praying about God working in my heart about pastoring. Had talked to him, just some initial conversations about, in about a month and a half, 2 months before he passed, about that, and just some very general conversations about where life might be headed. And we had prayed about a couple places and moving out west or pastoring and that kind of thing. And so we had, over that last month and a half, we had had some pretty deep discussions. He had been struggling with a back issue. So he'd been kind of laid up from that.
Yes.
The church auditorium was in the midst of kind of a major renovation. And so for that month before, which the Lord guides those moments and things, the month before, to try to encourage him, there'd be times where I'd just drop by the house in the name of, I need to kind of know what we're working on next. Here's a bunch of pictures of what's going on. Tell me what you want done or what you want different. And so he'd relay that to me, and I'd be going back and forth. We'd be working on the renovation part of it. And so we had a bunch of long conversations in that month.
Yeah.
Where we had always been close, but we'd had a lot of uniquely long conversations that would start about talking about the renovation, but then it would also delve into what he was thinking and how God had burdened him about some things upcoming in the church, his own personal life, my life. And so we had had some unique conversations in that month or so before. The couple of days before, things had gotten really busy, finishing up that renovation. And so I hadn't dropped by those couple times. Justin called me the night before, just said felt like he was doing not great. That, maybe there's something more than the back going on, but wasn't sure. He told me they were talking about taking him to the doctor the next day. It was late that night when Justin called. I thought about going right then. Decided not to. Prayed about it, just kind of thinking through, how should I feel about this? Because I didn't want to scare him. Or all of a sudden Justin leaves and then everybody comes over. But I knew they had put him on some medicine for his back and just a whole variety of things. And so I said, well, I'll go by. We knew he was going to go to the doctor the next morning. I can't remember if he called or not, but I went over early to help just get him to the car.
Oh, yeah, I did. I texted and said, if I'm going to take Dad to the hospital, if I can't get him to the car by myself, I'm going to call an ambulance. And then you live 1 minute away, but I think you were there in about 40 seconds. So I'm not sure how you got there that fast.
I was getting ready for work and stuff. It was 7 something, I think.
Yeah, it was a little before 8 for sure.
So I was about to be headed in for work, and so I just went that way. And then we just sat and talked. And I do remember that. We just sat and talked. He sat in a chair. I could tell he wasn't feeling well. Didn't think anything dire was going on. We just sat and talked, and then some of the story that you all have already told, events kind of proceeded through. Came clear there's something going on, and just we're sitting there talking 1 minute, and then the next it came clear he's out of breath. Something's going on. They got him settled, and we're trying to take him out, and I saw clearly he looked up at me and said a couple things to me, and I just knew. I think the EMTs were kind of working around him, and just by what he was communicating, I knew something had happened. In an instant, things had changed, and so I grabbed him, started telling the EMT, something. He's gone. Something's gone, and felt where I was holding him, felt his pulse stop, And so then I started trying to tell the EMTs that and help get him on the ground. And had John, remember trying to have John take you to the other room because I kind of knew some of what was coming next. Stayed there with him. And so, yeah, what you were mentioning, we talked a little bit about it before. And trying to learn to balance, that is a traumatic moment.
Yes.
When things seem okay and then they're not, kind of pulls the rug out from under life, makes you doubt situations as you go through it. You're like, oh, this feels like a normal situation, but maybe it's not, because there was this other time where it wasn't. It's not what I thought.
Right.
And so I think the 3 ways that we mentioned, you're trying to learn to process grief,
right?
The sorrow of losing someone, then trying to process trauma, which is, the event. You're trying to process what actually happened, not just the impact of someone being gone. And then for me, the dread took quite a while. Still, it doesn't go all the way away, but I think the impact that a moment like that has, you dread it happening again. Makes you question moments in life. And so trying to deal with each of those things separately and realize that there is nuance to it.
And I think with dread, I remember you describing that to me earlier as just when an event starts to go wrong or something is starting to happen, you're, after having it happen like it did with your dad, your mind immediately thinks that the worst thing is going to come in every situation.
Yeah.
You almost
Yeah,
have to
that
talk.
was a...
Yeah. So that's what we mean by dread.
Yeah,
too,
yeah.
to
I
some
think that
extent.
there's a deeper connected part of that. There were several things that happened before this that we had experienced. I'd experienced grief in life, and then one kind of comes after the next every couple of years, it felt like, for a little while. And then there were several things that happened after that in our church family and people we knew, different things. And you just, it's hard to think if there's multiple ways this could go. I think the dread aspect of it and I guess it's a part of grief, but the dread becomes, if there are multiple ways that this could play out, your mind starts to assume it's going to be the worst one.
The worst one's going to happen.
Kids get a cold or they get sick and you can't explain, there for a little while. And so I think it's like a bruise, I guess you'd say. It's very...
That's a good word.
Tender. Life becomes very tender. And so things feel fine. And then, within a few months, COVID kind of came to the forefront. And, I got 3 kids at that point that were, 1, 3, and 5, around those ages. And, somebody gets sick, something comes up, a family member, church family, I'm going to the hospital to get this test, and your mind starts to dread it because you want to avoid it, just like a bruise or broken bone. You don't want to hit it or bang it again.
Right.
And so you try to cap off certain parts of your life to where you don't feel those things. And so, there's different, I think the dread was something unique I didn't expect. The grief, the process of grief, and then the trauma part of it, I think they come in waves. I think grief is something the grief has a weight to it, kind of a constant weight to it. I think the trauma is more like a surprise, like it bursts onto the scene all of a sudden. The grief just kind of hangs there. And then the dread is kind of like a flood, you kind of see it coming, feel it coming, and you try to stop it but can't. So
almost like a wave. Here comes a wave, and I can see it. I know what's going to happen, but I can't stop it from happening.
Yeah.
For me, that even translated, and I know it probably did in your life, and we don't have to go down this road right now, but that dread even leads to anxiety, where your body and your mind don't want to cope with this constant thought of, this is not going to turn out okay.
I think each aspect of it just carries different weight, and your mind can go in different directions, and your body, like you said, your body, your heart. There's a lot of it's a maze. There's a lot, and you think you got one thing connected and hooked up the right way again, internally, and then something else disconnects somewhere else.
Right.
And they're all connected. Where humans are holistic in the sense that I think the scripture teaches that your body, heart, soul, mind, spirit, they're all connected. And so walking through each of those things together, when one thing kind of comes unplugged in one spot, it affects somewhere else. And you try to diagnose the part that's over here, when in reality it's the part that's over here that is struggling. And so that's why I think it's very complicated. I think, especially, and not everybody deals with grief, deals with the trauma aspect.
But some do. That's why it's
some
important for you to tell us about that, as far as what it's like to, or what you do, or how it's different to deal with grief versus trauma versus.
And I mean, I will say this, for somebody that may be going through it, I've come to a place, and I think I came to this place pretty early on, that regardless of how difficult it is, and maybe not everybody, there's nothing wrong with not feeling this way,
Right.
but regardless of how difficult that moment was, I can honestly say, like, I would not trade that.
You mean being able to be right there and just know how he passed and when he passed and be with him.
And different personalities are different. For some people, I think that'd be fine. Like they would not being there may help, that kind of thing. But for me,
like Justin said in his interview, I think I would not have been able to cope with being right there at the moment it happened. And people need to understand that there's nothing wrong with either way you view that. But what were you going to say?
No, I just think,
scriptures?
I wouldn't change that part of it. The pain and the trauma and the burn and difficulty from the actual moment. I think that being there with one of the people that you're closest to in the whole world, it's very difficult to put into words. I don't know that it helped him any. He was in the Lord's hands regardless. But I think being there in that moment is warped as that may sound.
No, it doesn't sound warped.
I wouldn't trade that. I wouldn't trade being there, even though that was difficult. The outfall of it is difficult.
Yes.
But I feel like I felt like that from the very beginning, that I wouldn't have wanted anybody else to be there. In the sense that, they put him in the ambulance and it happens in the ambulance. If he'd have been at home alone because everybody was out working and his back was having difficulty, if he'd have been in his office, whatever, in public, I just, in a selfish way, I do have learned to cherish that moment in a weird way.
Well, I think your dad's personality is such that he would be comforted to have someone right there in that moment. I don't know. That's what I think is that he would be comforted with that.
So that is one thing I'm thankful for. I've never had that burden so far.
That's good. That's good.
I didn't want it to be any different. So, and no matter what somebody went through, I've seen some people pass since then. And I would just say that moment it's a big moment for us because we're still living.
Right.
But that moment doesn't define somebody. There are deaths that are difficult to watch visually.
Yes.
And there are some that are, however you want to say it, peaceful. I think that's a ironic statement. The body that God gives life to stops having physical life. It's a violent thing no matter what. No matter if it's in somebody's sleep, or if it's an accident, or if it's in an instant, or if it is a battle. And so I think that is one of the parts of the trauma and the grief part of it is you're fighting hard not to remember that person's life on that moment.
Yes.
Um,
Not let that moment define
yeah.
the whole rest of their life.
Whole, you know, he's
Because
50,
some people do have a
yeah.
horrific death, and you don't want that to be what defines.
Yeah. He's 55 years old. That moment lasted 90 seconds.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's
That's
difficult for us, you know, on this
Right,
side of
on
it,
this
because
side
you
of
just you think that moment, you relive it. They've never had to relive it, not even once, you know, and they never will.
No.
So as hard as that is for us, you know, you're dealing with the grief aspect of it. I do take some comfort in that. Yeah, he's, you know, for us, it's a memory that replays over and over and over.
Right.
And for him, it's, you know, it's an instant. And for somebody that doesn't see this, for somebody that sees somebody with a terminal, long-term disease, and that there's different aspects to each part of it.
What are some of the things you've dealt with after?
Yeah, so I think walking through it, I think initially there was a lot of I dealt with some different aspects of it. In my case is unique, not necessarily make it different or harder than others. It's just unique because I did work for him too, and so I'm tied to the family aspect of it. People have different. Not that people have different personalities, but people have different layers to their personality, who they are as people. And there are aspects of grief that I think you grieve each aspect of that person. So there was Don Sumter, the husband, the dad, the grandfather, the friend, neighbor, boss, Christian, pastor, all those things. And all of them went away. You know, so you
were connected in more than one way.
Yeah, so you're going to grieve each aspect. I think family, different than friends or, you know, other or whoever it may be. When you are grieving the loss of a family member, you're going to grieve every aspect, and you're going to get called into grieving each aspect of that, because a friend's going to come and say, "Here's what I thought about your husband or your dad," and you're pulled in to grieve with them over something that yes, he was to you as well, but not in the same way. And so you're grieving each aspect of it. And so there was some need that was presented right away.
Yes.
When he passed, and because of my unique position as assisting him, kind of getting pulled into not replacing, but immediately there was a need. There was
you spoke at his funeral. You preached his funeral. You preached that the Sunday. He passed on a Friday. You preached that Sunday, and then continued to fill in the pulpit.
Yeah. And I don't know if that was wise, or if somebody should have gotten in the way of me. And that was what I wanted. I didn't do those things because I felt like I had to. To be honest,
I remember you saying, "I just want to be a help."
Yeah, you kind of wanted to feel. You feel helpless in your grief, so you want to feel needed as well. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense.
But like, you are helpless and can't change it.
Right, you can't bring him back.
Someone needing something, and so you can kind of assume needs. Sometimes I think in grief you assume needs that you don't have to. That nobody expects of you, but and sometimes you could assume a need, and I did that. Or, hey, this needs to be done, and it really doesn't. I have to do this, and I really don't. But then there's other things where you want to feel needed, and that's okay. And I think for the people that are in grief, helping somebody else in grief, I think that's something to kind of keep thought of and feed off of the person that you're trying to help. They may want to feel needed.
Right.
You know, that don't pull back completely from them. And I think my position, I was able to kind of insert myself, not in an authoritative way, like I'm going to speak or I'm going to preach or I'm going to do this. It was just like, hey, here's a need at the church. This person.
Well, I remember you saying it like that. I'll fill this if you want.
Yeah.
But people did want you to.
I'll do this. And it helped in a way. It helped in a way to feel connected to him, but it also, more than that, it helped in a way that like, okay, I've got something I'm going to do today, not as necessarily a distraction, and so, like I said, I think there's good and bad both to that. I think I think there's moments where somebody is in grief and it's good for them to just, everybody hands off, pamper, bring them something and let them just be alone today. But then I don't think it's healthy to take somebody that's in the midst of grief and just constantly remove everything from them.
I actually just read that that you, part of your, not that you're ever healed, but part of the healing process, starting even immediately, is you going through some motions of daily life. And
if Nana babysits the kids
right,
within a certain length of time, Nana needs to babysit the kids again.
Right.
Whoever fill in the blank, so-and-so's, this guy's wife passed, and he cuts his grass. There comes a point where he needs to cut his grass again.
Right.
Now, I don't mean that in a like you dump it on him. We do things, but in the sense of like there is a part that can feel normal in the functioning. I mean, I think I jotted a couple of those things down. That
okay.
I think that segmenting, for me, I segmented moments of life and days of life in that after. And some days, sometimes it was good, sometimes it was bad if you but I jotted a couple of them down. There's some things that just have to be done. That needs to be done. And then there's other, there's moments of necessity. Like in that moment, in the days that it happened, he's got to go to the hospital. Okay, now we got to come home, and now there's family coming in there, whoever, this needs to be done. For me, for work, had it not been related to him, and I had an employer or a boss that passed away, there would have been need that comes up from that. So I remember going that day to the church, grabbing some things, because this was on Friday, Sunday's coming, what are we going to do? We're going to walk through some of this. So there's a survival mode that kicks in, a moment of necessity. Those are fine, and I think they actually help. I think they actually help ground us, so don't run away from those things. Then I think that there's a functioning phase where there's moments, I don't have to do this today. It's not a necessity. It's not a fight or flight moment, but it's a functional moment that will help me.
Right.
That I need to do and not avoid. Then I think there's moments where you process, and that's where you allow yourself to have the emotions. You allow yourself to, and I say all this not at all as an expert. It's just it's
what you went through.
And I didn't handle it all well. I didn't handle it all perfect. But in those, I think those initial things help. So like, what do I have to do? What is absolutely needed? What should I do? What, function. And then processing, let myself feel something. And there's different things that'll bring that about. It could be a conversation. Maybe I'm going to look at a picture of him or somebody. I'm going to read something that I think might be helpful. I'm going to listen to something. Those are processing moments. And then I think that there's moments that are escape moments. That you're going to escape from this. And I think that initially I tried to avoid those, but I think now looking back, like, there is nothing wrong with that.
Right. You're not wired to.
It's not an unspiritual thing. Yeah. No.
Exactly.
So I think like the necessity, the moments of need help keep you there in the present. I think the moments of function help keep rhythm. I think the moments of processing help keep you being who you are as a person emotionally. But then I think the moments of escape kind of hit the pressure release for all those other things.
Yeah.
And you can't have all. I will say this: like, there's days where I struggled to do just one of those. Okay. Like, and I just kept doing it. Okay, we're in a hyper need moment. Like, for instance, in a few months, I became pastor. Interesting circumstance, that kind of thing. But I think it was just a few months later. I preached through and kind of functioned in an assistant way, interim way, and then became pastor. And then COVID happened.
Yes.
So like 4 weeks later. but for me, like if people have said all along, oh, that must have been so hard. You just lost your dad, and my grandfather passed away in January. Dad passed in September. Pop passed in January, and then I became pastor in February. COVID started in March, and build the ego. Honestly, like people, oh, that must have been so difficult. I don't know how you held it together. I don't know how you did that. It's so difficult. And at first I'd be like, oh yeah, the Lord gives grace. And that's true. But in reality, that question, like, I don't know how you did all that. I don't know how you held it together. Those things are exactly what helped me hold it together. Maybe to a fault at times. But it was like, Dad passed. There is so much going on. Church, family, my kids, helping. There's all these different things. And then there's some other things that all happen kind of in the same time period. Pop passed. There's an element to that in the same way. His passing was a little different, not fully expected, but a little longer time period in it than the church. And then COVID. And for some people, COVID was like, oh, this is the worst thing ever that happened with anybody. My job shut down. This happened. But for me, it was like I got put into a need thing all the time. Like this decision has to be made. Yeah. What are we going to do for church? How are we going to put these things online? And so for me, it was like I went into that high functioning need. Yeah. I got to do this out of necessity. And in some ways it's helpful, but in the long term, I know that there were days, weeks, and maybe a couple, even months where I went into that all completely. And so I wasn't doing the other.
Yeah, you weren't grieving and you weren't processing.
I wasn't doing normal human functional things as a dad, family member, human, everything from exercise, fix this thing in your house, go pick up the groceries. Like I was doing them, but that was on the outskirts. It was all about, this is what is needed. Right. Like I have to do this right now, right? Which is a unique circumstance to me. So I was in that all that time. And so I didn't do some of the other things for a while. So there was very little processing and there was very little escaping. It was like, there was some people's job, set them down, it's quiet, you're at home, you do whatever. For me, it was different. Like there was all these decisions that had to be made. We had a school. You
had to figure out what. Yes,
so
that's true.
Was put in, so
now you got to preach online. And
so it's put into a very heightened, constant, dramatic situations, what it felt like for about 8 weeks. Then things went back to normal and it's like, oh, the world's going to go back to normal. Now I got to deal with these things again. And so I say all that to say whether there needs to be all those moments. There needs to be moments of need. I have to get this done. There needs to be a moment of function. I should get this done. There needs to be moments of processing. I just need to let myself be who I am and feel this. And then there needs to be moments of escape. Like there's nothing wrong with just, I need a day. I need some time to not think about this.
Right. Right.
But I think if you do any of those, and I'm sure there's more, that's just the 4 that I can isolate in my own life. But I think if you do any of those all the time, it's not going to be healthy.
No.
I think understanding that the goal of the grief that you're going through, it's about, as wrong as this may sound, it's like it's about you, it's not about them.
Right, they're not.
And so
here.
there's moments where I was
suffering.
like, man, I'm like I need to be in this to show like how great of a person this person was or how much I loved them, and that kind of thing. What's setting a clear goal? Like, what would this person's desire be for me? And my role is different. My experience is different. I had a great relationship with Dad. I don't have regrets about it, but I am perfectly aware that is not everybody.
Right.
And so there's that aspect of it. So I can only speak for mine in that every grief I think is different. Because you're going to handle it differently if you didn't have a great relationship.
True.
If there is a regret, so I would just encourage people to handle each aspect of it but try to keep some clarity to the thought that like the grief is what you're going through right now. Mm-hmm. It's what you still here on this earth are dealing with. And no amount of sorrow or hardship or difficulty in your life is going to change that.
The situation.
Yeah, it's not going to change the situation. It's not going to change.
It's not going to bring them back.
No. Yeah, no, it's not going to.
That's the hard truth, but it is the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And where we come to that place of acceptance, I guess.
Yep.
So, what, I know you're saying you had times of imbalance, and then you made sure, or you're working on, we are all working on,
Yeah.
that being more balanced. What, I guess, based upon trauma, what are some of the things you've dealt with?
So if I can separate those out, which sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. Yeah, sometimes I can. And helping that, understanding. Well, if I relive that moment 2 years from now, 4 years from now, 4 years back from today, if I go in there in the other room and close my eyes and relive that moment, the traumatic experience of that moment, that may not mean that I'm like having a setback in grief.
Right.
And it may not even be grief itself. So it may be something that's brought on. So I think that trauma is different. In recognizing that, I don't know that it's helpful, but I think it brings clarity to it.
Right.
What am I going through right now?
Right.
And I think, going back, I think that has helped me decide when I need to escape and when I don't. So, for instance, like grief, my understanding, I love Dad, love my heart, love Pop, love my heart. We've lost a man. I have anybody. Like when I was in college, one of my best friends in college died in a car accident.
Yeah.
That was one of my first real experiences, just personally, with grief. And so, there are certain elements of it that are grief. I am sad that I don't have this person. I am sad that they're not in my life. Grief is, I wish that my kids knew him, because I want my kids to know good people in this world. That love the Lord, that love them, that contribute and pour into their lives, and he was one of those people. So I want that for them. I think that is grief.
Yes.
Right? So I can feel that, and it's good for me to feel that to a certain extent. I don't want to ignore that feeling. Right. I don't want to put that off. I don't ever want to get to the place where I'm like, I'm good with my kids not knowing him.
Right.
Like I'm not ever going to be good with that. I'm okay that this is what the Lord designed, but man, I wish that they knew him. So that grief, that grief, that part, I don't need to escape from that.
Right.
But like the facial expression that I can remember and see that he made right before. You can edit this out if you want.
I think you should tell it.
The noise, like the noise that happened. The breathing, the sounds.
And he even spoke to you.
The feeling, like I got my hands around his neck and his heart's pounding, throbbing, and then it stops. I can feel that. Like I can still vividly feel that if I want to. So grief, I don't think I need to escape grief. I want my kids to know him. I wish he was around. I want to talk to him about this issue or problem. I need advice. I want to hear his voice. I don't need to escape that. The sights, sounds, and experience of the moment, I don't need to relive that.
Right, because
I don't like that. That's not grief.
Right, that's trauma.
It doesn't help me to relive that. And so at first, when I would relive it, I was just like, it's the brain's so fast. I can relive that 90 seconds. There's days where I feel like I can relive that 90 seconds 100 times in 10 seconds. That's what it feels like. Like I can zone out for 10 seconds and then snap back out of it. And in that 10 seconds, I feel like I remembered it 100 times over. It's okay for me to want to escape from that. And I think at the beginning, I couldn't separate that out. For me, that was part of grief. I'm destined to have to relive this over and over the rest of my life. I got almost a martyr syndrome. But coming to the place where I can learn to, I don't have to relive that. So when I am struggling with that, when there is something that, for lack of better words, triggers that.
Yes.
And there's some moments where it's fleeting. Like there's some moments where I'll walk in and something will trigger it, and it's an instant boom. It fleets. It's gone. Okay, like I just have to deal with that. But there's other moments where, just like anything else, you get in an argument with somebody, you get a discussion with someone. And later, like you just keep rethinking of it over and over and over and over again, and you're like, "Oh, they said it this way, or I could have said this, or whatever it may have been." Something that brings up something you saw that angered you, and you relive it, and you just want that to go away, or you nurture it. You're doing one or the other. So there's certain aspects of it that I know. It came, it went, it's gone. It happened fast. That stinks. I've relived it. Okay, it's over. I don't need that to crush my whole day. Like I don't. I might think of it again, but then there are other moments where, for whatever reason, out of the control of my own mind, and even you pray, you try to meditate, you try to do different things, you read scripture. There are some times where the brain overpowers, and I think the trauma aspect of that, where it is like, this happened, just boom, 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 and it's just happening over and over and over for whatever reason, and that is okay for me to get away from.
Right.
And I've had to try to learn what takes me away from it.
You mentioned to me earlier, I didn't realize this, but when you hug people, even let's just take your own child as an example. You hug your child and you feel the pulse, and it will take you to that moment. So it's,
there's all kinds of different things, and I think again, and maybe this kind of has become theme of a conversation, is seeing the nuances of that, the trauma and the grief. The grief is okay to let it use and change us, even shape us maybe in a way.
Yes, it does shape you.
But then there's trauma. And I think you see that. For me, one thing that helped was like, even sidestep for a moment, like even aspects of scripture. You read the Psalms, you read different things. There's a meditation on difficulty.
Yes.
Right? David writes about experiences, threats, fears, violence, loss, sadness, shame, and those things he speaks to consistently and regularly because of what he's dealing with. I think about even when he recounts Saul and Jonathan, he loved Jonathan, and I think he expressed he loves Saul, right?
Yes, he did.
So when you read the first chapter of 2 Samuel, and David is singing or speaking, eulogizing in a way, Saul and Jonathan, how the mighty have fallen. He speaks about his soul. He talks about the soul of Jonathan. He does not, and Saul and Jonathan died violent deaths.
Yes.
He does not recount over and over and over again the nature of the violence and the disturbing aspects of it.
Yes, because it was a gruesome scene.
Yes, and so I think there is some precedent for us that the Lord wants us to be able to handle grief, aside from allowing us to escape the trauma, if we can. And I think that's okay to come to that acceptance. And so, like I said, there's just several different things that trigger the moment for me. Most people I hug, like if I hug a friend, whatever, I'm typically not like squeezing them around their neck and feeling their pulse, not that emotional typically, but particularly with my kids, my wife, family members, nephews, stuff like that. Somebody small, especially, you kind of hug them, your hands are around the back or their neck, you can feel their heartbeat, whatever. And that does, like, there was for a long time, it's not as prevalent quite probably anymore, but like there for a long time, I couldn't tell, like, am I trying to feel their pulse when I hug them?
I'm making sure.
Like, am I trying to feel that, or is it just happening? And so I'm noticing it, and I'm hypersensitive to it. And so then I zone out for a minute because I can remember it. I remember it stopping. Like, I remember it being there, and I remember it not being there. And the change in the feeling of somebody's body, not to be too whatever. But I remember that change. And so that, something like that would, boom, I mean, it would send me back into it. Silly things, I've done a couple of, certain, like I said, certain sounds. Doesn't need to go into all the detail, but there's certain sounds, there's times my kids have made that exact sound. And being goofy, being silly, whatever, just, it sucks you back into it. Yes. It's interesting what pulls you back into it. There's certain things that pull you back into grief, I think. There's certain things that pull you back, and that's okay. Let's handle that deal. And there's certain things that bring you back into the trauma of the moment. And I think there comes a point where you don't want to run into that over and over and over again.
Right.
Don't. And I say that there is no substitute for time in the process. So if I was trying to deal with it now, the same way that I did 3 years and 8 months ago or whatever, that would be probably an issue. So it's not the same. So let those things change over time. If you're right in the face of grief, like you went through something traumatic 4 weeks ago, there's probably not a rhythm you're going to be able to establish to get out of this right now. Right. And so it's okay to work to escape. But like I said, like hugging, sounds, there's even certain smells. So we had just renovated the auditorium, right?
Oh,
it doesn't have anything to do with the actual moment. So I guess that would show the difference between being pulled back into some grief versus pulled back into some trauma. So hugging people, certain sounds, certain things will pull me back into that moment where I relive that moment over and over. Mm-hmm. Whereas, so for instance, like our auditorium, that was 4 years ago. Well, still, so the carpet was brand new, things had just been put in, and his funeral was in there, right? And he preached in there once before he passed away after the renovation. Then his funeral was in there. And so there are mornings that I can walk in to the auditorium and Nancy Crane has vacuumed the auditorium and cleaned it. And it has the same smell as that moment. Not a bad smell, not a disturbing smell. It's the smell of that particular carpet smells new. And particularly when it will happen is like if the air hasn't been on. So like if it's spring, fall, and it's staying 70 degrees in there, the air, the heat doesn't turn on, it just sits. That room just sits after they vacuum. And it is a strong smell. And so like I will walk in and I feel like I could see the caskets in there, and so that's a little different. It's not making me relive the moment over and over and over again. And it's different for everybody. I mentioned earlier, like I don't have and haven't since the very beginning struggled with some things that other people struggle with. Holidays, birthdays, anniversaries, the yearly turnover of the date that he passed, and all. Like I've never struggled. Like I've literally had people text and say, "Hey, I'm praying for you today." I'm like, "Oh, that's cool." But I haven't heard from this person forever. I have no idea why they're praying for today. And then it sets in later. It's the 3rd anniversary of, which sounds completely calloused and like
people process
different. But it's just that has not been a difficulty for me. Whereas I know for some people it's very difficult for them. His birthday,
like you said, a smell might.
Yeah, like his birthday. Like I'm not struggling with that, And so I think it's different for everybody.
It is,
and I don't feel like I need to struggle with those things. Like the first few times it happened, I'd be like, "Oh yeah, today is the 1 year anniversary of this," or today, it's Christmas again without Dad, whatever, and I'd be like, "Man, everybody else struggles with this." If you have family and friends. And I say this sensitively because I understand that not everybody has that gift. We have had family and friends and support. So not everybody has that. But if you do, embrace the fact that not only does everybody handle each from family to family, person to person grief differently by the circumstance, but within the family about the same circumstance.
Yes, yeah.
So like, you sense like sometimes my kids will struggle with it, especially the oldest one. Sometimes he'll struggle from time to time. And there's moments where, man, I'm trying to comfort her. She's struggling. But like right now, I don't feel that sad. Like I don't feel that struggle. Like I feel for her. And sometimes I'm like, man, something wrong with me that I'm not feeling this in this moment. There's times where we'd sit as a family and somebody'd be upset or they'd be teary. Or there's times where I'd be upset and teary and other people weren't. And like, it might not be a good thing. Like if the whole family just all had it at once.
All grieved the same and,
right?
and all couldn't, yes.
So there's no judgment that should be cast of why don't you feel? Why don't I feel? I think we judge ourselves more than others. Why don't I feel more sad about this? But also toward others. Like the Lord put you there. You're feeling this, and somebody else might not be because they're there helping you.
Right.
And so I'm not going to judge somebody because they don't feel the same way I do, or vice versa. Like the Lord probably brought those things, and it's hard for me to talk about grief outside of the context of the Lord and what He gives because so I know
that's how you're going through it.
I think. Not being overly difficult. If you're a goal-oriented person, grief's going to stink. I mean, it stinks for everybody.
Because you got this goal out there,
yeah.
and you don't get to that goal.
You don't get to do that. You don't get to set the goals and then accomplish them in grief.
Right.
I don't know that that's a good way for anybody to handle it. So, it's natural part of life. It is the most unnatural. It's the most unnatural thing that could happen to a human being because God did not create us. I believe from Scripture, He did not create us to die,
right,
or to experience death from either side of it, to go through it, or to watch someone go through it and then have to keep living physically. And so it is very unnatural. And there's no one that is. There's no design. It's not something that was designed for. It's all in the Lord's sovereignty, right? It's all in His divine plan, and for us to have to deal with it now. But like, we were not created to have to deal well with this.
Exactly. What are some things you would say to him?
That probably a lot more like him than I even realize. And in some ways, a lot of ways, I'm very thankful for that. Sometimes it's not because I'm trying to; it's just there. Which I think that means he parented in a more effective way than he probably even realized. He didn't say a lot of things that we should do.
True.
Like that wasn't his style to be like, "This is what you should do. This is how you should do it. This is what's next." He asked a lot of questions. And he'd ask you a question and you'd answer it. It would be your
your answer to your question.
Yeah. So he'd teach you by asking you something. So Tommy parented better than he probably understood that he was doing. And then that we'll see him soon. I think that this has given more clarity of reality than anything else in my whole life. More clarity of like what life is, that life is brief here, what life,
it's a vapor.
Is about, the nearness of eternity. It brings into clarity what matters and doesn't matter. Stress over certain things here that in reality, when you think about it, thinking through that day that he at 55 years old, I have a 36, and I say, if I lived all of this all over again, I'd be 72. But then it also comes back like, Dad got 55. So it regrounds it.
Yes.
So I'm 36. I'm 19. From 19, if you get that much.
Right.
And so the Lord's in control of all that. And I say that to say it brings the weight of the intensity of this moment. And I don't want to escape that. I don't want to numb myself to that.
Do what we can for the Lord while we can.
Yeah.
Serve Him, invest in eternity.
Yeah.
And love the people that you are around while you can love them well.
Yeah.
Well, I want you to know that I appreciate you sharing your heart, deep things that are hard to talk about, and we'll probably share more again in another interview.
I'll interview you.
I love you very much.
Love you too.
Thanks for doing this.
We appreciate you joining us today at Speak Your Grief with Sonia. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube as new episodes are added weekly. Thank you again for joining us as we unpack our grief. We hope you have been reminded that you are not alone in this journey.